Hey everybody, it's Joe the 3D printing professor, and I said it before. And the last time I said it, I told you I was going to say it again. So here we go. If you've got a 3D printer, if you like making board games, there is no reason for the fun to ever stop. And in this edition of 3D printed board games, we are going to be looking at games that could be bought commercially, yes, but could also be created and expressed with PrintABlok. And if you're new to the channel and have never heard of PrintABlok, hi, how you doing? It's nice to meet new people. It's good to have you around. Look around. Maybe don't look around. It's a little bit of a mess, but it's good to have you here. PrintABlok are a set of interconnected building blocks and the connectors that connect them together. And they were designed for 3D printing. They have connectors on the top, bottom, left, right, forward, backward. They are a truly three-dimensional building block set. And in the past, I have used PrintABloks for building all kinds of cool things. But before we get into the games, I want to make mention that most of these games were made possible because I made a change to the source for PrintABlok. In the past, whenever I wanted a new block, I kind of just made it by hand, brute force, as you will. But there are certain categories of PrintABloks. There's, of course, the base blocks that are just, you know, squares and fill into shape, and you can make them 2 tall, 3 wide, 4 long, whatever you want. However, I never really had a tool to make the whole block procedurally. And I now have that, and it is available to you to use. You just have to go into Blender, move one little part, and it creates a block of whatever size you want, and then export that block. But it's not just the blocks. PrintABlok also has half-size blocks that only have a connector on the top and the bottom, and there is now a procedural way to make half-block plates of any size that you want. They also have these panels, I call them. They are very small, as thin as they can get. In fact, they are so thin that you can only put the connectors in on one side. If you put a connector in on one side, it blocks it from going in on the other side, so you kind of just have to choose which way they go. But these panels are actually super useful, and these are what I used a lot in making these board games. And lastly, there are PrintABoxes of various size. And again, in the past, I just kind of made these with brute force. I made them the sizes that I want. Well, now I can make them, and you can make them, any size that you want, which has been a boon for making them because, remember, as I'm going to be grading these games, sure, I'm going to be grading them on how much fun they are. I'm also going to be grading them on theming and whether they tell a story or have any sort of theming with them, but I am also grading them on shelf presence. That is to say, do they have a place for their own pieces? When you put it on the shelf, can you see what it is? And these PrintABoxes are great for answering that particular category. PrintABlok has been used for a couple of games already. There's PrintABlok Chess. It's just chess made out of PrintABloks. And of course there is PrintAQuest, the modular adventure game that I just won't shut up about because I'm really enjoying developing it and I hope that you'll check it out. But today we're talking about games that have already been established and could just as well be made with PrintABloks because of their blocky nature. So let's jump into a few of those right now. Cathedral is a game for 2 players where both players are placing buildings on a grid in an attempt to gain territory and place more of their buildings down. It's a simple, potentially abstract strategy game, but this 3D printed version by Corey introduces unique buildings for both sides that I think kind of looks a little Star Wars. And this 3D printed version actually comes with a lid that just covers it all up, allows you to put it on the shelf nicely, and it even has some good branding on it. So we'll call that a pretty good one for shelf presence. But my one complaint about this version is that the cathedral in it wasn't very exciting, wasn't nearly as fancy as the other buildings were. So I found a different cathedral. Then I realized that it wouldn't fit in with this set, so I resized it, and that was a lot more work for something that I thought was just going to be a quick swap and replace. I ended up spending hours working on this, but now I've got a cathedral in this set that I'm pretty happy with. And because this game lays out so nicely on a grid, it is a game that you could print a block. So I designed a PrintABlok version of this. Now, each of the pieces in this PrintABlok version of it is made of multiple PrintABloks that are assembled together. And I'll tell you the truth, I kind of enjoyed the process of building the individual pieces for this. It was a lot of fun. However, do you want to PrintABlok it? Because once I had all the buildings built and I actually tested this game out, I discovered there's a little bit of a problem with the PrintABlok version of it. See, PrintABloks are designed to fit together fairly snugly. There's not supposed to be a whole lot of gap between the individual pieces. That's by design, but unfortunately it means that this PrintABlok game is too tight for this type of game. These pieces, yeah, slide in kind of rough. They don't pop out very easily. In the end, it's PrintABlokable, but I might recommend, instead of going for the PrintABlok version, go for a different one that has a little bit more gap between the pieces so that it's easy to put them in and take them out. Now, Cathedral is a game that you can buy commercially, so we got to ask the question of, should you buy it or should you print it? But it's a game that has been around for so long that it's one of those that I don't feel bad recommending you actually 3D print, especially considering how absolutely gorgeous the buildings are in this particular set. So yeah, I'm going to say for this one, go ahead and print it. Santorini is a Greek island known for its volcanic landscape, whitewashed villages, and beautiful sunsets. Santorini, the game, is an abstract strategy game for 2 to 4 players, where players take turns moving their workers and placing buildings in an attempt to get one of their workers to stand at the top of a 3-high building before the others can block them off and prevent them from doing that. Now, there are lots of 3D printable versions of Santorini out there, but most of them attempt to recreate the buildings by having each layer have a different look to them. But that to me just seems like a lot of work when you're playing the game. I kind of prefer this version. This travel version of Santorini by Jessica is a little bit more abstract. The workers are just literally meeples, and the buildings are all the same no matter which level that you're on. And it does come with a box, though it does lack a little bit of branding on the side. And if you use my trick to make a quarter-size set of the rules, you can fit them in there. However, I did kind of have to retype the rules to get a version that was appropriate for this travel version. Now, as a game that is just stacking blocks, that is almost perfect for PrintABlok. All you have to do is 3D print some regular PrintABlok, put some slip connectors in one side so that they'll stack nice up on top of each other. Print a 5x5 plate for making your board and put a bunch of slip connectors in that. I put that on top of a bigger board, a 7x7, and then printed a box to put underneath it. And then I used a couple of pawns from Printed Chess. Even I have to admit that this is Santorini for ants. This is a very small version, and I might recommend scaling it up, but I also might recommend, if you're gonna 3D print it, you might just want to 3D print the travel version. Although the PrintABlok version does give you the advantage of, if after you're done playing it you decide this game just isn't for you, pull out the connectors and you got a bunch of blocks to make something else with. Santorini was originally published in 1985 by Gordon Hamilton, and it was just this abstract version. However, it was republished in 2014 by Roxley Games, and they added an additional gameplay element. At the beginning of your game, you draw a card from the deck, and that is your god. And each god gives you different powers and changes things up, making a sort of asymmetrical gameplay. Now, in the question of should you 3D print it or should you buy it, I think that Santorini is a very interesting case. Because if you 3D print it, you are just getting the original 1985 purely abstract version of the game. But if you want to have the asymmetrical god cards, you should really buy it from the manufacturer. Unfortunately, they're selling it on their site for Holy smokes! That is a high price. Now, fortunately, if you look around, you can find it at a more reasonable price elsewhere. I don't know why it's so expensive right now on the manufacturer's site. Maybe this is just a temporary thing, but I think that this is a game that I might recommend you 3D print to try before you decide to buy it. And if you decide that you do like this game and you want to add the asymmetrical elements, then you should go ahead and buy it. Tak is a beautiful game. It says so right there on the box. Tak is a strategy game for 2 players, where players are attempting to create a path from one side of the board to the other, and it could be either one of them. The players aren't working to try and connect their specific sides. Either player can connect either side, but it has to be a complete line from one side to the other, no diagonals, though it can jog around a little bit as it goes. On their turn, the players place a stone on the board, or you can move multiple pieces to take multiple steps, dropping them as you go, but it does mean that you might give control of a different square to your opponent in the process. Now, in the question of should you 3D print this game or should you buy it, I've got a copy of the game here kind of as bragging rights because, quite frankly, this is a very difficult game to get your hands on. It never seems to be in print when you want it. And the creators of the game have actually, I've heard, said that they do encourage people to make their own boards for the game, and so they kind of like to see these pieces. So if you're going to make a beautiful game of Tak, why not make it with a beautiful board? This version of Garden Tak that I have here was created by Craeen on Thingiverse, and it is actually a board game that I have wanted to 3D print for a very long time. It's got stone pieces on one side, it's got stone capstones, it's got wood pieces on the other side with wood capstones, and I printed the wood pieces in 2 colors so that I could have like bark and wood on it, and I think that that's kind of neat. But when this board was posted, multicolor 3D printing really wasn't a thing, and so this board was designed to be painted. However, now multicolor 3D printing is a thing, and this board clearly was not made for it. I don't quite know what's wrong with this board, but for some reason the multicolor just bled all over the place on it. Now, maybe that's because of the way this board was made. Craeen didn't design this board themselves. They took multiple parts from multiple different pieces and kind of smashed them all together. And also, Craeen's version didn't have anything to hold the pieces with, and it doesn't have a box to hold the entire board with when you want to put it all together, so it almost completely lacks shelf presence. This particular board is one that you just set out on your table as decoration and maybe play a random game with your friends when they come over, if you guys are into that. Which you should be, because Tak is awesome. But after seeing the problems that I had with this board, my initial thought was I should remodel it and do it differently. Wait a second, I don't need to. I have already created different terrain types with PrintABloks, and so I could just make a PrintABlok Tak board, which is what I did. And using the new procedurally generated boxes, I was able to make a perfectly sized box for it. However, while potentially this could go full PrintABlok, and you could play it with half blocks as your stones and maybe pull back the pawns from chess to make your capstones. That would fill this board up extremely tightly. We would end up with a problem where you just can't get your fingers in there again and they won't come apart. So I created Tak pieces specifically for PrintABlok Tak that are sized a little bit smaller than a PrintABlok at about 14 millimeters. So it's much easier to place them on the board and much easier to play around them. And then I also created capstones. In looking for where could I borrow inspiration for stone carvings and for wood carvings, I decided to go with some islands. The stones are all based on Japanese sculpture, and the wood are based on Polynesian carvings. However, it was only after I finished designing them that I had the thought that Tak is based on Patrick Rothfuss's fantasy world that he created. He mentioned tack in his fantasy novel and then went and made the game real. So maybe I should have done a little bit more research on Mr. Rothfuss's fantasy world and borrowed my theming from that a little bit. Ah, well, it's a fantasy world, you know. Maybe they have some vaguely Asiatic East Islands that have similar art styles to Japan and Polynesian. Mr. Rothfuss, consider that a suggestion for your world. Now, one other thing that I wanted to do when designing the stones for this PrintABlok version is I wanted to make the stones unique, or at least have enough variety that you think that they're all unique. Because these are stones and these are wood-cut pieces of logs. They shouldn't all be identical. So I used procedural generation to make 10 different kinds that have slightly different patterns. They're all more or less the same shape, but just by using the displace modifier in Blender, I could add a little wiggle to them that made them each have just a slightly different feel. I'm really proud of the way that these tokens turned out, and even if somebody just decided to use these tokens on a different board, I would be happy with that. Just scale them up when you do. Now, the PrintABlok version of this board does admittedly have a couple of downsides. First of all, it's a lot thicker than you could make another board that you were doing just by the nature of PrintABloks needing that much room for their connectors. Also, it's small. This is, I would say, a travel size version of the game. Though you could easily scale this up 150%, it would be a lot closer to the size of this particular board. However, it is still playable at this size, especially with these tokens that I've made that are specifically designed for it. And there is one other weird thing about this particular version. It's a 6x6 board, but according to the rules, when you play on a 6x6, each player only gets one capstone. However, the version that I 3D printed came with 2 capstones, which you only need when you get to an 8x8 version of the board. So of course, I modeled 2 capstones as well, but this board is only a 6x6 as well. But it is PrintABlok, so it wouldn't be that difficult to extend the board, to tear down the walls and stretch it out a little bit and make an 8x8 board. The only problem is, at this time, PrintAQuest, where I took the terrain tiles from, only has 3 different kinds of floor terrain right now, so I would have to wait until I have a 4th type of floor terrain, grass or something, which I am planning on working on, to make an 8x8 version of the game. Now, I'll tell you what, I am really proud of the work that I did on PrintABlok TAC, and honestly, it turned out really well. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to release the files for this on Thingiverse, Printables, anywhere you get your 3D print files, you'll be able to get this. And if any one of those gets 10 makes, 10 people who make and print pictures of their PrintABlok TAC sets, then I will go ahead and make the 8x8 version as well. Hopefully that'll give me a little bit of time to develop the grass tiles and other assets that we need for that. So there you go, a couple more board games that you can 3D print and add to your collection, and at least one that I would recommend you try PrintABlocking and adding to your collection. But that's it for this video. I want to thank you very much for watching, and I want to remind you that you are a child of a loving Heavenly Father. You're special to Him, and so you're special to me. Take care of yourself. And if you can, get out and take care of somebody else, because we all need each other. I'll see you next time.